Ever run out for like a quick errand, just pop in and out, and then somehow hours have just like vanished.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. Happens all the time.
Well, imagine that. But instead of the grocery store, it's the International Space Station. And instead of hours, we're talking about an unplanned 9-month stay.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even picture that.
That's exactly what happened to NASA astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore. They just splashed down off the coast of Florida after a much longer than expected trip to the ISS.
It's a pretty wild story, actually. We've got an article here that goes into all the details about their return and really the whole saga of their extended stay.
This is one of those situations where there's so much more to it than just the headline, right?
Absolutely. I mean, what started as a pretty routine mission to test a new spacecraft turned into, well, this whole extended space odyssey.
And that's what we're going to do in this deep dive. We're going to really unpack everything from the initial mission goals to the challenges they faced and all the unexpected twists and turns that came with their unplanned extended stay.
I think what's really fascinating to think about is the human side of it all, you know? How do you cope with being in space way longer than you anticipated, and what are the long-term effects of something like that?
Totally. So, to kick things off, let's rewind back to the beginning. Their original mission was supposed to be in June of last year, and it was all about Boeing's Starliner, right?
Exactly. So the plan was for Williams and Wilmore to be the crew for this big crewed test flight of the Starliner.
Okay, and this test flight, was it meant to be like a full-fledged mission to the ISS or more of a shorter trip to just see how the Starliner performed?
It was definitely more on the shorter side, focused mainly on making sure the Starliner could handle having astronauts on board and could do everything it needed to do, like
Yeah,
a crucial stepping stone to make it a regular way to get crews to the ISS.
gotcha. But as we know, things didn't quite go as planned with the Starliner. It wasn't ready to bring them home, was it?
No, it wasn't. There were some, well, pretty serious issues with the propulsion system.
Oh, wow. So, like engine problems.
Yeah, essentially.
Mhm.
And we're not just talking about minor glitches. There were some specific problems that, really raised concerns about whether it was safe to even attempt a return to Earth with the Starliner.
Okay, so this wasn't just a slight delay. This was a we need to find a whole new way to get them home situation.
Exactly. It threw a huge wrench into their whole departure schedule and, well, everything. NASA had to think on their feet, and figure out what to do.
So, what happened with their ride home basically grounded? How did they even get back? You can't just like hang out in orbit forever.
Right. So they were reassigned, it was a whole logistical feat in itself, to SpaceX's Crew 9 mission.
Ah, okay, so they hitched a ride with SpaceX.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Crew 9 was already set to launch to the ISS the following September. But to make room for Sunita and Butch, instead of the usual 4 astronauts, they launched with just 2.
Wow, so they basically squeezed them in. That must have taken a lot of coordination behind the scenes.
Oh, tons. Imagine all the juggling they had to do with crew rotations and spacecraft availability. It's a massive domino effect.
So they essentially ended up kind of waiting on the ISS for the next crew, Crew 10, to arrive so their ride, the Crew 9 spacecraft, could become available to bring them back.
Exactly. Once Crew 10 got to the ISS, that freed up the SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft that had taken the smaller Crew 9 up there.
And that Crew Dragon, it had a name, right? I think I read somewhere that it was called Freedom.
You're right, it was Freedom. And that became their ride home after all that time. It really shows how connected all these missions are, how each crew arrival and departure depends on the one before it.
Yeah, it's like a giant, carefully choreographed dance in space.
You could say that.
So that brings us to their actual departure, the 17-hour journey back to Earth and then the splashdown. Hearing it like that makes it sound almost routine, but being inside that capsule, I bet it was anything but routine.
Oh, I'm sure. It's a well-rehearsed procedure, the whole re-entry, descent, and splashdown. But you can't take away from the fact that it's still incredibly intense and demanding.
Yeah, I mean, they're hurtling towards Earth at incredible speeds.
Exactly. The article mentions their 17-hour journey culminating in a splashdown off the Florida coast.
And it was in the evening, wasn't it?
Right, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time. But remember, this isn't like landing a plane. It takes incredibly precise timing and maneuvers, and of course you're dealing with some pretty extreme conditions out there.
Speaking of extreme conditions, what about the heat the capsule had to withstand?
Oh yeah, that was intense. We're talking temperatures that can reach a mind-boggling 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit during re-entry.
Yeah.
It's like 2,000 degrees Celsius.
Seriously, that's hotter than like molten lava, isn't it?
Pretty much. You've probably seen pictures of the capsule after splashdown, and it has this kind of charred look, That's from the heat shield doing its job. It basically burns away in a controlled manner to protect the astronauts inside.
It's incredible to think about the engineering that goes into something like that.
Truly amazing. It really puts the whole journey into perspective.
But even after all that, it sounds like they were in good spirits. There's that quote from Nick Hague, I think it was, about a capsule full of grins.
Yeah, that's a fantastic detail. It really speaks volumes about the relief and just the sheer joy they must have felt after such a long and uncertain time. It shows how resilient the human spirit can be, how even after facing all those challenges, they were still able to find joy in that moment.
Absolutely. And it also speaks to their training and the bond they must have formed up there, you know? Going through something like that together really creates a unique connection.
I bet.
And then there's that almost surreal detail about a pod of dolphins appearing as the recovery boats approach the capsule. It sounds like something straight out of a movie.
Doesn't it? It's like they go through this incredible journey, come back to Earth after this extended adventure, and then they're greeted by a welcoming committee of dolphins.
It's pretty magical.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things that reminds you of the beauty and wonder of nature, even amidst all this incredible technology and human achievement.
Absolutely. Now, the article also mentioned them using mobility aids once they got out of the capsule. Why is that? We don't see that after, like, a regular plane flight.
Right, and that's an important point. It all comes down to the effects of prolonged exposure to microgravity. Even after a typical 6-month mission on the ISS, astronauts need time to readjust to Earth's gravity. But after 286 days, like in their case, the effects are even more pronounced.
So we're talking about things like muscle loss, bone density issues, and problems with balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They use those mobility aids, and then they undergo a pretty extensive physical rehabilitation program back in Houston, all designed to help their bodies gradually get used to gravity again and regain their strength and coordination.
It makes you think, right? Imagine how your body feels after being a couch potato for a few days. Now, multiply that by, like, 9 months in space.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how much the human body can adapt.
And even with all that, they were still waving and giving thumbs ups. That's some serious resilience.
It really is. It's a testament to their dedication and how adaptable the human body and mind are. I mean, they went through all that, and they were still in high spirits, ready to face the next challenge.
Okay, so their 286-day stay, that's significantly longer than the usual 6-month ISS rotation. Where does that put them in the grand scheme of long-duration space flights?
So the article points out that while 286 days is long, it's actually the 6th longest U.S. single mission.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize there were others who'd been up there even longer.
Yeah, the current U.S. record holder is Frank Rubio, and he spent an impressive 371 days in space.
371 days, that's over a year.
And globally, the record is held by a Russian cosmonaut, Valery Polyakov, who spent a mind-blowing 437 days in space.
That's incredible.
So while Williams and Wilmore's stay was definitely extended, it wasn't the longest, but it was still well beyond the usual mission length, which, comes with its own set of challenges.
So what are we talking about here? What kind of challenges do these longer durations bring up?
Well, on the physical side, we already talked about the muscle and bone loss, the vision changes, and the whole balance thing. But on top of that, you have to consider the psychological impact of being in a confined environment, far from home and everyone you know, for that long.
Yeah, and especially when it's unplanned, that must add a whole other layer of stress and uncertainty.
Absolutely. There's a really interesting quote in the article from a psychologist, Joseph Keebler, and he compares their situation to being unexpectedly stuck at work for 9 months.
I love that analogy. It makes it so relatable.
It really does. It highlights the mental resilience and adaptability that's required to cope with something like that. Knowing that your planned return date is basically out the window.
And having to maintain focus and morale in such a unique and challenging environment.
Exactly. It really reinforces the idea that spaceflight is so much more than just engineering and technology. It's about the human element, the mental and emotional strength it takes to face these extraordinary circumstances.
And then there was the issue of supplies, right? The article mentioned the initial challenges they faced and making sure they had enough of everything with the unexpected extension.
Oh, for sure. When you suddenly add 3 months to the mission for 2 extra crew members, it definitely puts a strain on resources. They have redundancies on the ISS, but still, it takes careful management. And I'm sure that added to the overall stress and complexity of their situation.
It must have felt like one thing after another.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Now, it's important to note that this whole situation also became a topic of political discussion back here on Earth. And Our role here is to just present the information as it's laid out in the article, in a neutral way, without taking sides or endorsing any particular viewpoint.
Absolutely.
Mm.
We're just here to lay out the facts
Right.
and let the listeners draw their own conclusions.
So, to that point, the article mentions claims made by former President Trump and Elon Musk that the Biden administration had essentially abandoned these astronauts and had refused a plan that could have brought them home sooner.
Right. Their argument, as presented in the article, was that there was a way to get Williams and Wilmore back earlier, but that the current administration didn't act on it.
And in response, the White House put out a post on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, that said, "Promise made, promise kept." How does the article frame that?
It presents that post as the White House's way of emphasizing their role in getting the astronauts home safely and on a reasonable timeline. Maybe a way to counter those earlier claims.
Okay, so basically the White House was saying, hey, we got them back just like we said we would.
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
And what does the article say about NASA's response to all this?
Well, according to the article, NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager, Steve Stitch, gave a different perspective. He said there were never any plans or discussions about sending a relief crew earlier than what actually happened. And he also said that the recent schedule changes, the ones that ultimately led to their return, were mostly due to SpaceX's own scheduling needs, not because they were rejecting some earlier rescue plan.
So based on what NASA is saying, the idea that there was a plan to bring them home sooner and that it was refused doesn't seem to hold up.
Right. It directly contradicts those claims.
The article also mentions some unusual comments from former President Trump about Sunita Williams. Specifically, he referred to her as the woman with the wild hair and made some speculative remarks about the relationship between the two astronauts.
Right. And again, we're just reporting what's in the article here. We're not offering any commentary on the statements themselves.
Exactly. But it's important to include those details because they were part of the bigger conversation surrounding the astronauts' return.
Yeah, it shows that the discussion went beyond just the technical and operational aspects of the mission.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's summarize the key points for everyone listening. We started with Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore heading out on what was supposed to be a short test flight for Boeing's Starliner.
Right. But then those propulsion issues cropped up, and their trip turned into an unexpected 9-month stay on the ISS.
They eventually came home safe and sound aboard SpaceX's Crew Dragon Freedom, but not before enduring some pretty intense re-entry conditions. And they even got a welcome home from a pod of dolphins, which is just amazing.
Yeah, and we talked about how that extended time in space, although not record-breaking, still came with a lot of physical and psychological challenges.
And then we got into the political side of things, with those different claims and remarks being made. It really highlights how complex these missions can be and how there are so many different factors at play.
Absolutely. It's not just about the technology and the science. It's about the human element, the politics, and the broader societal implications of space travel.
And that brings us to something for everyone listening to ponder. As we start thinking about longer duration space missions, like missions to Mars that could last for years, what are the long-term effects going to be? How do we support these astronauts not just during their missions, but when they come back after spending years away from Earth?
It's a huge question, and it's something we need to seriously consider as we push the boundaries of space exploration. We need to understand the psychological and societal impacts of long-duration space travel.
We need to figure out what kind of support systems they'll need, both up in space and back here on Earth, to make sure they can thrive, not just survive, these incredible journeys.
Right, it's about the whole picture, the human experience from start to finish.
So, as you're thinking about all this, what was your biggest takeaway from this deep dive? Was it the technical challenges, the resilience of the astronauts, the dolphin encounter, or the political discussions? Whatever it was, I encourage you to explore those thoughts further, maybe even do a little research of your own. The world of long-duration spaceflight is full of fascinating complexities and challenges.
And it's just getting started.
Exactly. There's so much more.